Okay, so we're back to revisiting the issue that just popped up for us, where the autofill will mess up your styling. Not completely, but one of the things that if I right-click this and hit inspect, you might wonder what the heck is happening. So let's take a look and I'll show you. Um, One of the things that happens in browsers whenever it autofills is that it's letting you know by trying to override any existing color styles and other kinds of like background images and stuff. It usually will make it this really obnoxious yellow color to let you know that this has been an auto-populated area. All right, so uh, and and so you might be wondering how you can change that. Well, it's a little bit tricky, and so I'm going to show you kind of a shortcut workaround so that you don't have to pull your hair out trying to figure it out. But we're still going to have to do a little bit more of a workaround with the background image. It's a little trickier. So if you look down in your inspector and you scroll down, you'll see, here's the most dominant rule that is being used, but the background is being overridden, so we got to figure out why that's happening. You scroll down and here's our other rule that's being inherited, but that's got a problem. And if you keep going, what you're going to see is this thing where it says user agent style sheet. This is where the Webkit is, and Webkit is something that Chrome uses, Safari uses it, Opera uses it to some degree. There are going to be special things that it does that will override any of your styling once a certain state kicks in, and the state would be the autofill state. And so you can see this here where it says input WebKit autofill, and so it's and then also it's applying it to text area if it's a text area that's been autofilled before, and then select, which we don't have in this form, but what's happening is that it's saying background color and it reassigns it to this yellow color, and it won't even let me change it. And the reason is because it has this thing here called important at the end. So just so you know, if you ever put something right at the end of your declaration value, like in this case, it would be the RGB value. Right after that, you put a space and then an exclamation and you type the word important. Then what that means is that nothing else can override that. Okay, and you'll notice that it does it here too for background image. It says background none, important, and then color, and the color is black and it says important. It's so frustrating because they think they know better than anyone what your styling is going to be, and this could actually be like in direct conflict in some ways with your styling. So this is very hard to change, by the way. So instead of me trying to explain exactly all the things you would need to type, I'm going to show you an article that will help you at least get started with this. If you go to csstricks.com and you look for an article called Change Autocomplete Styles in Webkit Browsers. You could actually go right up here and just type that in here. Anyway, so you could type, autocomplete styles, WebKit browsers, and I'm sure this will come right up. Anyway, and it explains to you what the problem is, and it explains to you how to fix it. And this is something that will actually fix most of the problems right here. Right, so if you were to copy this, and it shows you a little demo down here of what's happening. I have to hit result to toggle this open, and so if I were to go on autofill, you see that it would pop up, and what it's doing is it is autofilling, but it's changing the autofill by overriding certain things, and it explains what it's doing up here if you wanted to read more about it. There's another really good article that I found that explains things in great detail, maybe too much detail for what your needs are. But let's just take that code and we'll copy this code, and we'll jump over here and let's go in to our CSS, and like maybe right after all of this input stuff, I'll come down here and I'll paste it. All right, and let's go ahead and save it. Now I don't really want the background to be black. I'll sort of explain to you what it's doing. All right, all of these these are all of the selectors, and you can see that it's got commas after each selector, so it's doing comma separated selectors. Anyway, and then it gives all of these declarations, these properties. All right, so it's saying that it's going to make a green border. We could change that if you don't want it to be green. You could even say border none. You can change the text fill color. So you can't just change the regular color. It has to be Webkit text fill color. And we're going to change that to green. We could change that to something else later if we want, but we can just see what it looks like. And then here's the way that it changes the background color. You can't actually change the background color in the way that you would expect. It puts a very large box shadow on it so that it goes dark, right? If you want it to be not black, but instead maybe white, you would change this number to FFF so that it's not 000, and it's going to do an inset box shadow for you. And then the transition, it's going to do a background color transition, and then it's going to ease it out. And anyway, so let's just save that, and let's just work with what we've got right there. Okay, and we're going to go over to our browser. Let's come back to our file now. We'll hit return, refresh, I mean, and we'll go and start to try to fill this thing out. Okay, and then you see here that at least it's not bright yellow any longer. It's still got a white background. It's got green text, which is fine for me for right now. That might be a nice way of saying that it's a different autofill if you highlight it in a different color and give it a different color that stands out a little bit. But the image is gone still. And the problem with that is that the image, there's really not a good workaround for this. I'm going to show you one that I've come up with, but it means that we need to change our HTML. You might say, you know what, I'm fine with this, I don't care. For the sake of this demonstration and for the sake of your assignment, if your autofill just does this, that's fine. If you don't go back and refactor it to put in all of these images again, I'm not going to take any points off. That's okay, but I do want to show you a way that you could troubleshoot this and come up with a different solution, okay? So just let's look at this and talk about it for a second before we jump into the HTML. So knowing what we know about positioning, about relative and absolute positioning, and the things that we've used before in this class, we know that if we have this input box, right, and we wanted to make something absolutely sit right here on top of that image, on top of that input box, then what we would need to do is wrap the input box with something, some non-semantic thing, like it could be a div, it could be a span tag, it could be anything like that, right? And we would need to make the parent that, let's say it's a span tag, we'd need to make that span a relative position so that if we put an image inside of it, we could make the image absolute and make it sit right here on top of the form, right? So that it looks like the way that this password icon looks right now. And so if we do that, then whenever we go to change, this form and it doesn't autofill, then it's not going to make our image disappear because it's no longer a background image. It would be an IMG image that would be placed inside the HTML as opposed to being background in the CSS. Okay, all right. So in theory, you understand that, maybe, right? So let's jump into our HTML. This is our CSS. Let's pull our HTML up. And let's take a look at how we have our inputs structured. And really the ones that I care about are pretty much just these top ones. I don't really care about the submit button because the submit button's the only other one that has a background image in it. None of the other ones do, so I don't really care that much. The submit button, though, is nothing that we fill, right? It's just a button that has the word submit in it. It doesn't autofill, so I don't have to worry about that one. So what we can do is look at this, and our current structure is that we have p tags wrapped around the label and the input. Okay, so that's a thought. Well, I don't necessarily want the paragraph tag to be the thing that we make relative positioning because then it might sit on top of the label. right? So we actually need to wrap something around this input tag. Now I could put a div around it, but div is a block level element and you really can't, you're not supposed to put a div inside of a paragraph. However, I could put a span tag, which is the other generic non-semantic tag in HTML, and that's the inline one. So I can put an input inside of something that's inline. So I'm going to highlight the input and do my Command-Shift-J to wrap it with a span tag. Okay, and then I can go in with the span and I can give it a class. So let's just say that we're going to use a class that is called, let's just call it wrapper. And if you wanted to be, actually, if you want to be really specific, let's call it input wrap. Okay, so that way we know that it's a wrapper that is specifically, we're specifically creating it and using it to do this thing with inputs. Okay, all right, so we've got this span tag now. Now let's go up here and, well, I guess before we change any CSS, the other issue is that, here, let's go ahead and make this also very clearly visible so that you can see the structure and the hierarchy of this. So we've got the span tag, we have the input. The other thing that we need to do is we need to have an image tag in here. Image whose source is in the images folder, and this is the name. So I'm going to choose the name.png, and then I'll give it an alt text attribute because you're supposed to have that, and I'll just call it, I'll just put user. Okay, and in fact, if you leave the alt empty, this is a little trick that I don't know if I've told you or not. If you leave the alt empty, that's technically not incorrect. You have the alt tag, but when you leave it empty, what that indicates is that it's decorative and not meaningful. And so really, that's pretty much what this is. It's decorative and not meaningful. All right, we've already got a label for it where it says first and last name. That's really what's important. So the alt tag is really and truly just for somebody who's using a screen reader in this case, because it's decorative and not meaningful. All right, if somebody can't see it, then it doesn't matter if they can't see it, all right, because it's got some other visual indicators of what's supposed to be there, okay? So we'll just leave that as images, image with the image source of name.png and an empty alt tag. All right, if I save this, you're going to freak out when you go see the results over here, hit return or refresh. You know, it shows that picture at its full scale, all right? It's not doing anything, it's not overlaying this, right? None of that. Okay, so let's think about now in the CSS how we need to modify the CSS so that it works with this structure. So remember, we need to make the span tag, who is the parent now of this input and of this image file, we need to make that position relative. So if we come down here, oh, and it has a class called input wrap. So let's put this with all the other input stuff. So we'll say dot input dash wrap. Okay, and what I'm going to do is just say position and then relative. I'm not really doing anything else with it. The whole point of this is just so that we have a relatively positioned thing that's going to hold these other two things. And that way it allows me to place this image basically on top of a portion of this input. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to say that the image that's inside of the input wrap is position absolute. So we're going to type it like this. All right, where we say the IMG inside of input wrap is going to be position absolute. And we're going to say that it is, for right now, let's just say top is 0, left is 0. These are not, we're going to have to adjust those, by the way. And let's just say that the, let's say that the height is about, I don't know, 40 pixels or so. I think that that's probably about right for this image. And then let's also say that width is automatic. Okay, so auto. And we also finally need to give this a z-index. So let's say z-index is, let's say 100, because right now we don't have anything else that has a z-index. So 100 is definitely more than 0, which is automatically what everything else is going to be that doesn't have a Z index. All right, so let's go ahead and save this and see what happens. It's going to look a little funny probably. Let's refresh because we're going to have to, oh, okay. So what's happening is that this is up here for some reason. Let's take a look and see what's going on. Let's inspect it. I actually might need to use a div instead of a span if that's not working. So yeah, I think I might. Let's do position relative, and then let's say display is block, and let's see if that's what I needed to do. Okay, so we'll say display is block for the span, and you can see that it's sort of in the right spot and it's about the right size, but it's not quite perfect. So this is where we could kind of make some adjustments, but before we start doing that, let's go ahead and fix that display block because we know that we need to. So I'm just going to add that right here, display is block. Okay, and let's hit refresh. Okay, so now what we can do is if we click on this IMG tag, then we can start adjusting the top and the left positioning. So if we say, I think top, let's say maybe it's about, I don't know, let's try 10 pixels down. Oops, let's try that again. Let me try typing in the right place, 10 pixels. That's a little too far down. Let's see what maybe 9 pixels does, maybe 8. That might be close enough. All right, so maybe 8 pixels from the top, and then from the left, let's say, I think originally, if you remember in our previous styling, we said we moved it 10 pixels off the left edge, and we gave it left padding. So let's try 10 pixels and see where that puts us. Oh, that's pretty dead on. That's pretty darn good. Okay, so now we don't want to just leave it there because you can kind of still see the ghost of the other one behind it. So I am gonna change these values. So it's top is 8 pixels, left is 10 pixels. Let's go over here and change that. We've got top 8 pixels, left is 10 pixels. Now the other thing that we need to do is we need to comment out the background image that's up here. Right, so we're going to find the one that says name. Let's just take that. Actually, let's just take anything to do with this background and background size, and we're just going to put a comment around it. Let's save it. Let's come back here, hit refresh, and that doesn't look too bad. And we can make sure that it actually moves properly with the form. It seems like it does. And then now the thing is that I can do the test, and let's see what happens. Boom, when I use autofill, that picture still stays there. So I can do that to these other ones as well. That's not a bad workaround for something that everybody on the internet says is like really hard to do. It's not that hard. So let's jump back over here and let's do some other refactoring up here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this span class, we're going to copy it, and we're going to wrap this around the input for each of these, and we'll type an end span. We can tab this in, and let's just do that for each one. We'll put it right before each of these inputs. All right, and then we'll come down here, we'll put our ending span tag, tab that in again. Let's put that in, and we'll tab our input in. Now we need to go back and we need to put our image sources. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this image, and I'm just going to change the name for each one. So we're going to put the image right before the input inside the span. And let's just do that. And then this one, if you remember, the name is actually email.png. Okay, and then let's come down here. We'll do the same thing again. It's not behaving. Okay, there we go. And then this one, if you remember, it's actually, I gave it the name of phone, not TEL. And then for this one, let's go ahead and put its password.png. And okay, let's save that. Let's go down, and the other thing we need to do is we need to go into the CSS and we need to comment out those background images, just so you know. All right, so we've got these background images right here. We'll put comments around them for email, for tel, and for password. We'll leave submit alone. And then let's make sure that this works out okay, and then we can go and get rid of these background images. Let's come back over here. Let's hit refresh. Those look not so bad. Okay, let's do a test. We'll pick it, and boom, it remembers everything, and we're good to go. And I actually don't even mind that green color that was already pre-selected for me for this particular form, because it shows that it's a different color than these bullets, like the gray, the standard gray that I'm typing in. You could make it brighter. The only thing is I wouldn't make it too bright, because then if you make it too bright, then it almost looks like you've done something wrong. And that's actually one of the things I don't care for autofill too much about, like, is the bright yellow background. But if you wanted to make it a little bit brighter, you could make it red. I wouldn't make it red. Red always feels like it's like you're in trouble, right? Anyway, so I think I might actually like that green and just leave it that way. And I can even leave it so that it highlights, it puts a border around so that I know that those are the ones that got autofilled. All right, if that's the real goal of the autofill alert, is to say, hey, this is the information that's being autofilled, please check it first before you just submit your form, then I'll just leave the border around it too. And if you wanted, you could even put like some other heavier border, or you know, a glow around it or something, but I think that this is probably adequate. All right, so that'll do it for this part of the demo, where we dealt with these images and dealing with the problems with autofill. And so in the next one, we're going to talk about what we can do to change the submit button so it looks a little bit better.